We have ducklings, and that in itself is a miracle. A couple of days ago, it was looking like we were gonna have no ducklings. And here we have the most gorgeous and fluffy little yellow ducklings that made it through quite a traumatic experience to get to the point where they are now. What I want to do in this video is take you through the steps and things that we did to save them, as well as what happened to lead us to the position of having to step in and help nature, which we don't always like doing, but in some cases you simply don't have an option. Out of the 12 eggs we have 5 beautiful little ducklings. Unfortunately, we lost 2 in the egg stage. They didn't actually make it through the inner membrane and the internal pip. Then we had another 2 unfortunately die because of load shedding. For those of you that are not in South Africa, our dear government decides to switch the power off. So we had a session of 4.5 hours from 2 o'clock in the morning where we had no power, and the cold unfortunately hit 2 of them. And then there were 3 of them that were born blind, so 2 of them unfortunately didn't make it. They couldn't find their food, water, all of that. And 1 of the 5 we actually have is visually impaired. So we'll see how that one's little journey goes along. But yeah, out of the 12, we have 5 beautiful, fluffy little ducklings. And join me on this little journey as I show you what we did to get these 5 to the point that they are now. So after Mom abandoned her eggs 3 days before they started hatching, we had to step in to support where we needed because they were so close to hatching. So we were regularly candling these eggs and checking the healthy blood flow in the veins, having a look and seeing when the little ducklings made the internal pip through the internal membrane so that they could start pecking to hatch through the actual eggshell. But what we found is that after 24 hours, which from the research we did is kind of the threshold that you're looking for, these little ducklings weren't able to break the shell. And the risk that we were running here is that these little ducklings potentially could suffocate because the little gap on the inside that they have gives them enough oxygen to pip through the shell externally. But because they weren't able to do that, we needed to step in and give them some reprieve and some form of additional oxygen so they could get the strength to break through the shell. So what we did is took a drill bit and a needle, both sterilized, very carefully worked through the shell, and an amazing experience happened where as soon as we did this, the little ducklings started breathing through the little hole we made. But then 3 days later, we came back and the membranes on the inside were still intact. Now at this point, the ducklings should have broken through the membranes. They should be wriggling around on the inside of the shells and have actually hatched. So what we needed to do is we needed to step in and help these little ducklings. And after breaking through the top of the first shell, we could see that these ducklings were very clearly shrink wrapped. Now what happened here is because Mom abandoned her eggs outside, perfect humidity and heat, we had to bring them in and artificially heat them up. But unfortunately that change in humidity caused the shell lining to detach from the shell, and then as you can see, suffocates and shrink wraps the little duckling. So all that sticks out is their little beak and they can't move, which means they can't break through the shell and they can't hatch. A very important part of this step is actually looking to see when the blood vessels in the egg start to disappear, because what happens is when the eggs get ready to hatch, the blood flowing through the egg actually retracts and goes into the actual duckling. And here you can see the absolute joy from this little duckling, busy chirping and moving around because it's finally got a little bit of relief. The blood you see here is not from a vein that's being nicked. These are just vessels. As you'll see, as we clear out the membrane, none of it actually even transfers onto the duckling. But you can see that this little duckling just simply cannot move. So by simply removing the membrane and helping this little duckling, we gave these ducklings the best opportunity to survive in such a traumatic hatching, which if we had left them, they without a doubt would not have survived. So it's a slow, meticulous process to not hurt the bird, and also make sure that as you're moving along, you are confident that all of the blood vessels have subsided and all the blood has moved from the shell into the duckling. And unfortunately, because of this process, these ducklings being shrink wrapped and constantly trying to hatch, they were very, very weak. So what we had to do is put a little mini duckling ICU together, nurse them through the night, give them the warmth. We had to syringe feed some of them just because they were just too weak. But as soon as they started coming out of their shells, they started moving really, really well. And this is the first little duckling that came out, not the one that we showed in the picture. And this one had already started drying up, lifting its head, moving around pretty quickly. The second one was still quite weak, but it was breathing really well. We left them in their shells, and at this point what's happening is the egg yolk is busy transferring nutrients through its umbilical cord from the egg back into the duckling. At this point, and luckily it's through the research we did, we knew to just leave them in their shells. If you pull a duckling out of its shell at this point, you will kill it. The nutrients need to transfer from the egg into the duckling, and that umbilical cord will dry out once that process has completed. Once that happened and they pulled themselves out of the shells, they started fluffing up, started looking like all the little ducklings that you can see on Instagram, all of the social media channels that people just drool over. They started becoming these energetic little fluff balls that started cleaning themselves, eating, drinking, running around, and they grow up so incredibly quickly. But there were some of them that were still a little bit weak. And this is an example where we needed to help, and we did the best that we could considering it's our first time. But at the end of the day, we ended up with 5 beautiful little ducklings, and I'm also going to be documenting every day of their growth and releasing a video where you can see from day 0 to day whatever we decide to do, how they grow, how they develop, and how they change. So this was a traumatic experience with a beautiful ending, and I hope you learned something through all of the learnings we got through this.